there's a great deal of difference in hollies. Look at that.
Wow.
Between those two.
You can see one much brighter red, one more of the sort of ruby-ish, clarity, Merlot-y colour.
Well, this is I trust you to say that. This is a holly called Nellie Stevens, and Nellie Stevens is a very good berrying holly, but do bear in mind you have to have a male to go with the female. The female produces the berries, obviously, but you need a male nearby if you're going to get cross-pollination. In my garden, I've got lots of males. Well, I would have, wouldn't
I? Hello and welcome to the first Talking Dirty of 2024. Happy New Year to you. And we're going to continue our series looking at all of the wonderful things happening at East Ruston Old Vicarage, that fabulous 32-acre garden on the Norfolk coast where my co-presenter dwells, lucky devil. Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and very handsome horticulturalist. How are you and how was your Christmas?
Oh, Christmas was absolutely fine. Long gone and long forgotten. Thank goodness, because I always think that Christmas is the low point in the year as far as the garden is concerned, because it's really around the time that we have the shortest day. But hey, how are you? Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson, sitting in Cambridge, basking away with all your lovely houseplants around you.
Yes, which is somehow still alive. It's an absolute miracle. Actually, while we're on the subject, I mean, it's not looking particularly good because it's been a bit neglected, but my Haworthia limifolia variegata, it's little pups all around the edge. You can see how on it I am. It's still got its old flower stalk that I haven't taken off. Look at that. I'll just put that down there. But yeah, it's having little pups around the edges, which is very exciting. But yes, they're a little neglected.
Well, you know, this is the kind of thing that happens when you look after your houseplants correctly. I've got in my greenhouse loads of Echeveria, peacockii, the lovely glaucous grey leaf rosettes. Went in the other day and looked, and I thought, well, there's a lot of dead leaves around the edge. I'll just remove some of those. So I was picking the dead leaves, and the whole rosette came off. And then the side rosettes came off. And I thought, oh, it's Mr. Vineweevil. And sure enough, it was. So the only thing to do when you get that is really to clean up the wounds as much as possible. If it happens to anybody, I would just offer them this little piece of advice. Turn your rosette upside down and either cut a slice off the cordex, the stalk, if you like, or if you can't do that, get a cocktail stick and dig around in there, because some of those little blighters, the little maggots, they will be in there, in the stem, fairly deep sometimes, about half an inch deep. So do make sure you get them all, and then just chuck them outside. I do this, I just chuck them outside the greenhouse door on the path and watch the robins come and feed on them.
I remember my first ever encounter with Vineweevil when I was a very new gardener, and it was a heuchera, and I was so pleased with my heuchera, and then I sort of was rifling around and then it just moved, like the whole thing. It's like a toupee. So I always think of that memory whenever anyone mentions Vineweevil. I'm always transported back to my poor little heuchera.
You mentioned Christmas. Well, this is what part of my Christmas present was. Look at that. Aren't I really, really lucky? I just mentioned as a kind of aside. Have you seen Claverton cloches, or is it cloches? Well, you don't say galoshes, you say galoshes. So let's go with cloches. So I mentioned as an aside one day to Graham, and I said, have you seen Claverton cloches? The things they're making, the replicas of those lovely old Victorian garden cloches. And so they're on my table, sat three of these, this one.
Oh, the octagonal one.
Yeah, three of the latest design, which is absolutely lovely, because I have got three old ones of the original design. And like Vita Sackville West, we put them over clumps of violets in the garden just after Christmas to bring the violets forward. And talking of that, I mean, you know, we all like to, I think we probably all like to cheat winter a little bit. I mean, I've got a nice bunch of camellias on my table here. They're going slightly over now, but I picked them last weekend, so they've been indoors here for a week. And I picked them while they're just showing pink in bud. And then you bring them into a warm room and you watch them open. And you can do the same with things like not eucalyptus, Forsythia branches. Although Forsythia branches look very nice with a few grey twigs of eucalyptus poked among them. But if you bring them in just when the buds are starting to swell a little bit, don't try and force them too quickly. Bring them into, if I say a warm room, I don't really mean a warm room that you sit in and feel comfortable with. I mean somewhere about 55 to 60 degrees if you can, and slowly bring them on. And within a week or two, you'll have all these lovely twigs of Forsythia blooming away. You may have noticed actually that if you go to a florist at this time of the year, they will sell you very expensively wands of Forsythia, and they have been forced in this way. So it's one of the nice little things to do. When I was a child and we used to prune the apple trees in the winter, we used to bring branches off the apple trees indoors, and the same thing happened, except that apple blossom was pink and white because it had been forced a little bit. It was more white than pink, but it was nice to have it all the same because you really can't beat a fresh flower.
It's funny if you're a keen gardener and you love your plants, just saying certain things like you talked about bringing on your violets, you get that
Mm.
little sort of flutter of excitement at all of the wonderful things that are in store in the garden. I mean, obviously, Mother Nature will probably throw the odd spanner in the works, challenge us, give us some hurdles to leap over. But when you're at this point in the year and there is so much just starting to happen, I think I still get that kind of the excitement you get as a child before Christmas, I suppose.
Yes, yes, you do. I mean, there's certain plants that our Victorian forebears grew in the greenhouses, in inhospitable places like underneath the staging. I mean, if you've got a collection of ferns, for instance, and you've got an unheated greenhouse, you try some of the slightly more tender ferns, like the chain fern. I mean, it grows big, I know, and you need the space. But there are other plants as well. I mean, the Victorians used to grow mind your own business underneath the staging because it held the water and it helped with the humidity. A plant that I grow underneath my staging in the propagating house is a viola, and it's called Viola hederacea. It comes from Australia. It's not scented. That's the only drawback. It comes from Australia, and underneath the staging, it grows and romps away, and it produces in the winters some lovely little pink and not pink, purple and white flowers. They're purple in the middle and with a white edge to them. And you can go into the greenhouse and pick yourself a little bunch of these because they just keep producing and producing. But it's not terribly hardy. And so it can, if Dame Nature is going to be an absolute bitch and really send us some testing weather, it can die out in the garden. But I mean, if you leave it in the garden, it probably won't flower until mid to late summer. But if you plant it out, I mean, I bring 4 pots, always 4 pots. I don't know why. Bring 4 pots in, and it gets to about the end of February. I divide them into maybe 12 or 20, depending on how much I can get out of each pot. And then I use those out somewhere as a bedding plant in shade. And they will start blooming midsummer and go right the way through until the autumn. I saw them used at where was it? Hyde Hall in Essex. Hyde Hall that used them, and they interplanted them with this one of the brown sedges, the brown grasses, and the small brown grasses and the viola together. They look stunning. A little bit contrived, I must say, because that it was man-made, and each plant was a foot apart, 12 inches apart, 60 centimeters. Is that no, 30 centimeters apart. So they looked a little bit contrived. And if you don't like that, I mean, you just rearrange them into a nice wavy line. And don't forget, when you get to the end of your line, leave a 3 foot gap and then put another plant because it looks so much more natural as if they've just seeded around if you do that rather than just leaving them all together in a clump. Because in a clump, they do look contrived.
You talked about, if you need space for something like the chain fern, but
Mm.
if you're listening to or watching this podcast, chances are you're already a fern fan because I think they're the sort of plant that maybe lurks as a sort of supporting cast member when you first get into gardening and you're wowed by dahlias or daffodils, whatever it might be. You want a garden full of roses, whatever it is you've seen at a garden and you've thought, oh, I'd love to have that. And I mean, I've met particularly younger gardeners, powers of social media these days, whose entire gardening journey started with just coveting Dahlia Café Olay on Instagram, seeing it,
Yeah.
wanting it, going to a florist, not being able to buy it, having to grow it themselves. And then they've ended up being mad keen gardeners based off one beautiful bloom on social media. But once you kind of got through, I suppose, that stage of your gardening, and I'm very much still in that stage, but you get to love all those other creatures that make up the
But
full
it also
menagerie of the garden.
It's also visiting other gardens that make this
Yeah.
happen. I mean, the first time I ever saw an autumn flowering snowdrop was at Raveningham Hall in south of Norwich, in South Norfolk. And I was absolutely amazed because it was late autumn and I'd been visiting the hall and we were looking at, in particular, Richard Hobbs, who was the garden advisor there, he was a very good florist at some part in his life. And so he has this knack of putting together very, very clever plant combinations. And I went to look at some of these. And we've been looking at those, and in amongst one of his plant combinations was a snowdrop, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, what's going on? This is October, November, or something, and there was a snowdrop. And it was later on, the lady of the house came here for lunch, and Lady Susan, and she actually brought me a couple of these snowdrops, and I have now a very large clump outside my potting shed in a little shady bed. But going back to ferns, I remember going to another snowdrop grower, John Morley, who is in Suffolk, and he has the most amazing garden, full of snowdrops, of course, all, big clumps of separate varieties, which is wonderful because you can only go by invitation. But if you get an invitation, it's something you don't ever say no to, even if you're going to be frozen. And Graham said to me one day we were there, I've never been so cold in my blasted life. Ooh. But with John, you see these wonderful clumps of snowdrops, so you can appreciate their characteristics because one bulb in a pot doesn't tell you that. But a group growing naturally and having grown naturally for a few years, in other words, it's established, it then speaks to you or not. But John also has a very clever thing. He's got this shady area in his garden underneath very old apple trees, which are very well pruned, and they've got mossy trunks and things like that. But he combines his snowdrops with ferns.
Yeah.
And so you see, you've got not deciduous ones, obviously evergreen ones. So you've still got the leaves on, the fronds are still there to appreciate as well. And then that's when you have the time to look and to see and to appreciate. And you think, oh gosh, look at that. Here we are in January, February, and look what it looks fabulous. And so you get into ferns. And going back to Woodwardias, which is the chain fern, I have tried for a long time to grow these. I mean, our climate here is not ideal. We're too dry. The soil here is very free draining, not moisture retentive enough, really. But on the north side, outside my kitchen window, I can't see them because they're close to the house. But I planted 3 of these, and they have this whopping great frond, about 4 feet long, and at the end of it is a little bulbil, and that gradually weighs down until it touches the ground, where it takes root. And then another fern comes from that. That's how it romps around on the forest floor or the woodland floor. And it had done that into the path. So we've now got several of these potted up to make another colony in the garden somewhere else. I mean, it's endlessly fascinating.
And it's interesting the idea of ferns and snowdrops going hand in hand. I think that's exactly how I got sucked into adoration of ferns, was wanting them to plant alongside my very small collection of snowdrops, which I'm eagerly anticipating, what's going to happen this year and what will have done well and what will have sadly disappeared, and worrying about whether it's going to be a gift because I feel very frightened about having lost something that's been kindly gifted to me. But it would be people like Val Bourne, seeing, not in real life sadly, but seeing pictures of her combining maidenhair fern and snowdrops and thinking, oh
Yeah.
yes, I desperately want to get some of that. But then, I mean, partly because you were so kind as to have a big order and tell me to go and take one of each, which did lead to me not knowing what any of them are because I ran out of labels. And that thing where you're, oh, sure, I'll remember. I'll write them on my phone, and then it gets lost. And so half of them, I have no idea what they are. But I therefore ended up with ferns that are not tied into snowdrop bedfellows. And one of them, is it Dryopteris that's Cristata the king? I
Yes.
can't remember. Yeah, it's quite a big, as the name would suggest, quite a big fern, and it's now this absolute sort of backbone. It's not huge, but it's a kind of backbone plant of my little original shade bed I did just off the lawn of my tiny garden, so that I could have all these sort of shady spring treasures and primroses and the like. And it's wonderful. And then the other day in those high winds, my gate, it obviously got rotten at the bottom and it blew over, and it just missed taking out the fern. I looked out and I thought, got my beautiful fern, which has been looking so fantastic, but it just missed it. Got a little bit squished, but it's still there. And that's the kind of fern that I think, even if you've only got a small garden, it's evergreen, it's giving you so much bang for your buck. And it's just this great great kind of compatriot of all the other things that it's growing alongside.
Well, I was going to talk, you mentioned wind. That's quite a good thing to mention because we've had a lot of it. Not the unpleasant kind of wind. Well, it is because it's too strong. But we've had an awful lot of wind in the garden, and I noticed that some of the newly planted plants have got pushed sideways a little bit, and some of the self-sown seedlings. I mean, I'm thinking in particular Abutilon vitifolium, which seeds itself around the garden all over the place here. And I dig up those that I want, and the rest I and move or pot. And the rest, I mean, if they're growing in the wrong place, what do they become? They become a weed, so they have to go. But one or two that I'd left, they were sort of leaning slightly, so I was going around the garden staking, and I got myself some stout bamboo canes, some 1 by 1 tunnelized timber stakes as well, and I started to go around tidying things up. And I got about 5 stakes of each. Well, I went back to the pottage shed and I got another 10 of each. Then I went back and got another 10 of each because, you see one thing and then there's another. Anyway, and I was tying these plants up and I suddenly thought, it's a very elemental thing. And I don't mean to sound as if I'm preaching to the converted or being, big-headed or anything, but I wonder how many people know the virtues of using something called sash cord. And you can buy it on a reel. It's like a giant cotton reel. It's not that cheap, I have to say, or it's not that inexpensive because cheap has other connotations. It's not that inexpensive, but it is worth using. And when I tie a plant to a stake, I make a figure of 8 with the sash cord, and I make my knot on the other side of the stake. So you do a reef knot on the other side of the stake, trim it up, job done. But the great thing about sash cord is that it lasts for a very long time because it's meant to. It's sash windows, you see. The sash windows go up and down. That's what the cord was used for. So it's very, very strong, hence the cost. But one little tip is if you do think that you're going to go and buy some sash cord, do watch out because if you buy a sash cord where the outside of the cord has been treated with a silicone, and they do this to make it run easier through the rollers in the sash windows. If it's coated with this silicone, it won't hold the knot because the knot slips, and so it won't keep the knot tied. If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
And you'll end up having to do multiple knots, which doesn't look nice and it's very tiring and very testing of your patience.
That reminds me of sometimes you buy very nice shoes and they'll come with sort of designer laces which are impossible to tie and you have to do a double knot or they come undone while you're walking. That's what it reminds me.
My gardening boots do that. They've got this sort of round laces that are obviously siliconed, and they're siliconed to stop them rotting, I suppose. So because you get them continually wet, but they're continually coming undone, which is infuriating. There we are.
Now you mentioned spending a certain amount of money on the garden. I haven't had a chance to read it, but my other half has. I think that's something that gets alluded to in a certain article, which people may still be able to lay their hands on. I'm not sure by the time this goes out, it might not still be on the magazine racks, but
You're talking about the February edition of The Garden.
A fabulous, fabulous looking article. Sadly, I've not had a moment to sit and read it, but it's sitting there waiting for me.
I think I'll do a listen with Mother and read it to you. Are you sitting comfortably? Well, I mean, the thing about it is, it is a nice article. I mean, I can't say that I wasn't hugely impressed with Clive Nichols, who I've known for many, many years. And Clive Nichols is one of our foremost garden, if not the foremost garden photographer. And you'll see his name occurring in magazines time and time and time again. He's an extremely nice guy. He's very laid back. And until you get to know him, you sort of wonder, well, is he concentrating or is he really thinking about what he's doing? Well, the photographs in this article, and I've got it here before me. I mean, that is the cover, and that is a little bit of East Ruston there that you can see. That particular photograph has never been taken from that angle before. And I looked at it and I thought, Oh gosh, that looks familiar. Of course it is your fault. It's your garden, you know. But no, yeah, it is a nice article. It just, I mean, I don't like the title of it, 50 Years at East Ruston. Oh, somebody said on the radio the other day, yesterday, or something was on, I don't even know what it was, but he said, the voice said, always make the most of what you're doing, get the most out of it. Because my father said to me, you know, suddenly I was 40. And the next thing I know, time has passed and I'm 80.
Yeah.
And then you can't really do that much after that age. So make the most of what you're doing. Enjoy it to the best of your ability. There we are.
That's true. Regardless,
And
somehow my little boy's nearly one. How?
yeah, exactly.
So you left us talking about Alexas, I think, after a brief sojourn, thanks to some technical difficulties, which left Alan frozen. We always talk about people being frozen with a funny look on their face. Alan always freezing beautifully. That is why he is our handsome horticulturalist. But anyway, we've had a brief break. My dog is now making a bed on the sofa next to me, and I somehow look quite dishevelled, like I've been out in the garden, but I've only been washing up. However, while we've been paused, Mr. Gray, I did have a moment on Instagram, a rare moment these days, and saw a well-timed post, considering what we've been talking about, from Galanthaholic, the very lovely Brian Ellis. A match made in heaven, he says, a fern and snowdrops. And the fern in question is Polystichum, however you want to say it, Satyriferum Pulcherrimum Bevis. In the plumosum group, which means feather-like, he says. And you can see this in the shape of the fronds. I'll make sure in the video version that you get to see the actual post in question.
It's a lovely fern.
Very elegant fern, and the snowdrop peeking out from below is Lord Kitchener, he says. So exactly the kind of fern snowdrop combo we were just talking about.
Your country needs you.
Yes. Surely all Galanthaholics need Lord Kitchener.
Yes, he's a must-have.
And of course, Brian, I'm assuming, will be one of the people at your snowdrop day on the 4th of February.
I don't know whether he's coming to my snowdrop day because I think a week after our snowdrop day, he probably will come and sell, I would think. But a week after our snowdrop day, Brian Ellis is talking at the Hardy Plant Society's conference thing, and they're having from about 1:30 in the afternoon. They're coming to the garden here. Alas, that's not open to the general public. It's only open to Hardy Plant Society members. But Brian is actually speaking at that event. But the event that he'll be speaking at won't be in the garden here. It will be at their conference, which is at Stalham High School, starting at 8:30 in the morning with the annual general meeting. And then they're having a sale of snowdrops, and then Brian is talking. But I don't know the timings for that because I haven't been told yet. I think they're somewhere out there in the ether. I will be told, but I don't know what they are at the moment.
Do you have anyone talking at your snowdrop day?
We do, and it's somebody nobody's ever heard of. It's the indomitable Mr. Richard Hobbs, botanist extraordinaire. And as I mentioned already in this podcast, he did quite a lot of flower arranging earlier on in his life, and he's an absolute expert at putting shapes, colours in the plant world together so that one complements the other.
Well, exciting. February the 4th, date for the diary for your snowdrop event. It's always wonderful, and the chance.
It's a good event actually, and it starts at 10 o'clock in the morning and goes on till about 4 in the afternoon. And we have people in, so there's there's plenty of teas, coffees, refreshments, and there'll be some soup and some hot sort of sausage rolls and things like that for lunch. So you can sustain yourself, and there will be a fire lit in the tea rooms as well, because Richard will be giving his talk in the old tea room, and then in our regular tea room there will be a fire lit. So it should be relatively comfortable.
And of course, the chance to go and see lots of special varieties of snowdrops forming lovely clumps around your garden. But that isn't the only day that people can go, because if you're lucky enough to be in the vicinity, or you can plan a last minute holiday, you've actually got a few days that you're open so people can come and enjoy not only snowdrops, but all the other treasures out in February.
Yes, well, we're open from I think Wednesday the 7th, Thursday the 8th, Friday the 9th, and Saturday the 10th. And we will open from I think we're opening at 12 until 4 or 4:30. No, 12 until 4. To come and see the snowdrops. And again, refreshments will be available. So if people want to come, they haven't got to worry about bringing a thermos flask. They can sort of bask in the tea room where the fire will be lit. And there will be convivial conversation, and a few little nibbly bits and some wonderful soup to warm you through.
And you mentioned camellias earlier, but again, I mean, if you're a fan of this podcast, then you're already all over the fact that every time of year has its own beautiful plants to enjoy, but a lot in flower in your garden right now.
Well, terrific amount. I mean, from the old stalwarts, which is really the winter flowering jasmine nudiflorum. And I did actually think this is an experiment I'm going to try, and we'll see whether it works or not. If I got two fairly reasonably large containers and I put a jasmine nudiflorum and some kind of wigwam of either canes or metal or whatever, and trained them fairly judiciously, and tied them in as they're growing up and everything else, whether they might make rather nice sort of sentinels beside the front door throughout the winter. I just suddenly thought, well, why don't I make more of this, So I'm going to try that and see what happens. But yes, there's a huge amount of plants in flower at the moment. I mean, snowdrops and aconites, obviously. Camellias, well, we've had camellias, or should it be camellias? Because it's MELL, isn't it? Which is Mel. We've had camellias out in the garden here since September, late September, with the Sasanqua group, which come from Japan. These are, I mean, quite a lot of breeding is going on in the world of camellias at the moment, and they're crossing some of the Sasanquas with the Japonicas and with the other various bits and pieces. So whereby you used to get just the single flowered Sasanquas, you're now getting some with double flowers. And I think we've got one there. You're going to love this name. We've got one on an east-facing wall, very sheltered. I see it from my kitchen window, and it's got these sparkly pink flowers. They're semi-double. It's a Sasanqua hybrid, and I think it's called something like Chiffon Dream or something. It's horrible. It's a horrible, horrible name.
Oh, brilliant.
But anyway, I almost wish I didn't know those names, because many years ago, when Graham and I first extended the garden here, we bought camellias from a nursery up the road, about 7 miles up the road, from a chap called Barry Miller. And Barry Miller used to take his lorry up to Wisbech, and he used to buy plants at very reasonable cost at the auctions. And I mean, we could have camellias in, I suppose, if I say they're a metre tall, they're quite big plants, and they were very reasonably priced. And we used to go and buy perhaps 10 a week or something, just to fill the garden up a little bit. But of course, the one disadvantage is they didn't have any names. And today some of them still don't, but they're known as blousy pink. And so on and so forth. But some we have been able to name. And there's one of my favorites is a lovely little single red one. And it suddenly comes out, it starts blooming probably in mid-January, and then just goes whoop, and all of the flowers come out almost at once. And it's smothered with these, they look like little red butterflies. It's an absolutely charming thing. But again, it's a no-name plant. So, but it's better than Chiffon Dream, isn't it?
Yes, but what a sight to behold. You do have, I've never been the biggest Camellia person. Which I think I hearing you talk about them and having been to places, there's a National Trust property down near Minehead called Dunster Castle, and I remember really sort of paying attention to the camellias there and thinking, again, I had no idea which ones they weren't named, it's not that kind of garden necessarily, but thinking, I feel like there could be a camellia period in my future, when I really sort of get stuck into them and get to know which ones I like. But at the moment, I probably could do with a couple in the garden, because of course they provide interest at this time of year when some of my other plants aren't doing their thing.
Well, they provide interest every time of the year, you see, because they have such lovely foliage. It's dark green, it's shiny, it's light reflecting, it's always cheerful. And if you haven't got flowers on it in the summer, we'll just train a couple of clematis through it or something like that. Or your favourite, a Cremacarpus scaba, the Chilean glory vine.
Yeah, as ever, loads of little seedlings of that growing in my house, because when I bring plants in and put them on windowsills, that's how to germinate Chilean glory flower is definitely to just pop it on your windowsill over winter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that must get myself those Tresco mix that I always
The
aspire
Tresco
to and never
hybrid,
do.
yes.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, that is a FLOMO. It has been a FLOMO of mine in the past that for some stupid reason I never managed to fulfill. All I need to do is buy a seed packet, and yet I never do. It's one of those things that sort of looms over you and you forget at all the right moments. But my FLOMO ties in very nicely with all the things we've been talking about. FLOMO being a fear of missing out you get about a flower or a plant. And mine is a snowdrop. And this is a proper ridiculous FLOMO because I will never, ever have this, or maybe in 20 years when it's inevitably high price has reduced to something I could afford. Have you seen one of Joe Sharman's new introductions, Alan?
Are you talking about the Pulcherrimum double?
Yes, I am. This flew past on my Instagram, I don't know, a week ago or something, and I just thought, what is this beauty? And looking through the comments from the Monk Silver Nursery post on Instagram, just words like goodness me, fabulous, wowza, wow, gorgeous, super beautiful, very nice, very special. And a couple which say this snowdrop looks more like a tulip. And I think that's true. If you took that flower of the Galanthus Princess Benny, as it's called, and had that in isolation, it does look more like a tulip than a snowdrop. It is so fulsome, plumptious, I think would be an appropriate word, Alan. Isn't it a
Yeah.
gorgeous plant?
Well, I think it's isn't it the first Pulcherrimum double,
Quite
which has
possibly, yes.
which has a white centre and all the petals are equal in length.
And it's he describes it as his most vigorous and successful of his fully double peculiforms. And I'm assuming, I mean, it will be for sale, I imagine, and it should be for sale this season, he says. I'm assuming the price tag will be high. So this is not something that I will be putting in my garden. And if I had it, I'd be terrified of losing it. But it is such a beautiful thing that is a feeling of FLOMO for sure.
Well, I think it's something we can all put on our wish list because, as you quite rightly say, whether we have it this year or in 2 years' time, it's still something. It's something that's going to be worth. And you just touched on a word there, Thordis, which during our little break, I went to have a look at Mother Goose, another snowdrop, who is notoriously slow to do anything, and she's only just peeping through. She's quite a late one, and we have 3 snouts poking through this year. I went with Ian because he remembered where I planted it. I didn't. And whenever you get an unusual snowdrop like that, we always put some in an out of the way place where people won't find them, for the purpose of bulking them up. And after 4 years, we have 3 snouts. Now that is, to me, is not a vigorous snowdrop. And you just mentioned the word Princess Benny, vigorous. And I was looking through Avon Bulb's catalogue at snowdrops the other day, and the word vigorous counts because the word vigorous means that it's possibly increases faster than the majority. Yeah. So there's lots of snowdrops that look wonderful when you see them in specialist garden and everything else, but they're not necessarily vigorous. And to the gardener, I think, we want them to have a certain amount of vigor so that we can look forward to them increasing year by year, not like Mother Goose. I mean, after 4 years, 3 snouts.
Well, it's exciting to see them clump up, and they look completely different when they're a clump rather than this poor 1 or 2 flowers together. And of course,
Exactly.
there is the possibility that you'll be able to share them with your friends and swap them, and all the fun that comes with being a bit of a crazy galanthaholic. And a huge thank you to Dean. I've mentioned it before, but he did send me some very special snowdrops when it turned out that Viola was born on his birthday. So thank you, Viola. That was very kind of you. That was a day that I don't necessarily want to remember in great detail, but I'm glad that you were born at 2 a.m. on the 16th and not on the 15th after all, even if that would have shortened my experience. That earned me some wonderful snowdrops. So thank you very much, Viola, and thank you to Dean. Fingers crossed they'll be making a reappearance in the raised bed where I keep all my most special snowdrops, which seemed like a good idea to keep them separate. But of course, watering a raised bed through dry months is quite stressful. So they do have to go through some quite trying conditions sometimes. And I just hope that they don't mind that.
Well, I think this is what happens, isn't it? Because, we do forget to water things. Somebody very kindly gave me a potted azalea over Christmas, and I put it in the study, and I didn't go into the study for probably 10 days or something. And because I hope they're not listening to this. It had dried to a crisp, because one of the things that potted azaleas like is to be continually moist. And of course they don't like tap water because it's got it's too alkaline. So you really need to have a water butt to water them with. You talked about your FLOMO being Princess Benny, Galanthus Princess Benny, which is something I'm looking forward to actually seeing and possibly owning. I should make inquiries. My FLOMO is a tender rose, and it's a rose that you often see growing on the continent, and it's a big, blousy pink rose, and it's possible to flower it under glass in February, under cold glass if the greenhouse is sheltered enough. And it's a variety called La Follette, Follette. And I've just been looking on the internet and couldn't find it anywhere. So it's a rose that I would love to have to grow in the Pelly house.
Lovely.
Just because, it only flowers once. That's the drawback. So once it's flowered, you have a month probably of flowers, maybe 5 weeks, and then it's gone for the year. But, it's a bit like seasonal fruit. I mean, it's so much better to have strawberries in the summer than it is in February, January even. And so I'd like to find the rose called La Follette, but whether I ever shall, who knows? It doesn't really matter whether I do or not, because there's so many other plants that I get joy from. But it just occurred to me that would be nice, because you could pick 2 or 3, and it's got quite a nice tea scent to it too. So, if you just have it on the table when you're having your breakfast in the morning, it's just a lovely sort of it transports January into another meaning, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, what a treat to have on the darker months. Though, of course, night's drawing out, we can all start to get very excited about what the year has in store. And this podcast, fingers crossed, carrying on week in, week out with all kinds of planty chat. So thank you for joining us. Long may the adventure continue. And we will see you hopefully next week. But until then, happy gardening.
Happy gardening, everybody. Bye-bye.
I'm in extreme horrible HD now, which I don't like. I've been enjoying my...
I love it. I put my glasses on, get as close to the television. I think she's not as young as she looks.
Yeah, outrageous. It is, yes. It's not my preferred look. I mean, oh dear. And I've lost my blusher.
You mean you don't have a spare one?
No.
Oh, Thordis, I have a drawer full of spares. Other older people that have gone now.
No, you've frozen again. Right, a critical moment. Hello.
And the following week, we're open Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday for snowdrop visits.
Lovely.
Well,
that's very exciting. Right,
so
I'll blow
if you mean it.
I've not had much sleep.
Oh, yes, that's very exciting.